The following podcast is scheduled for one fall. Introducing first, the ace that runs the place, Sam Tate. And his tag team partner, Rob is Warren.
Welcome to the inaugural episode of the Scheduled for One Fall podcast. As many of you who are watching this on my channel may know me for my card game content, but I am reaching out with my friend Warren Sprague here. We're going to be talking some wrestling.
Yes, wrestling, the greatest conversation topic of all time. Thank you for having me aboard, Sam. It's an honor to be talking wrestling with you again.
And it's a wild time, right? We're starting this on the first of the new year. I figured new year, new me, new wrestling content to put out. And I would say that we just survived through the best time to be a wrestling fan era, if you want to label it so. And for me, this is going to be a journey of like how to get back into wrestling, because I wasn't super keyed in while we were under the best time to be a wrestling fan. Were you taking in like all the different wrestling media throughout the last, I'd say, 4 years?
You know, it stinks because I think if I were 10 years younger, it would have been so much easier for me to prioritize everything that there is to watch now. And I think even though I love this art form and this storytelling medium, there's just so much, man. There's so much content. It's impossible to feel like I can block out that much time to watch every single minute. But I have followed every single story and read the reviews for every single pay-per-view or watched many of them myself. And yeah, man, it's a roller coaster ride with just so much content. And I can't wait to break down how it kind of lived up to the hype, but in many ways how it didn't, right?
Yeah, and I think, so my personal struggle was, it's the best time to be a wrestling fan, but I can't take it all in, which makes me feel like a fake fan, because for a long time, the only thing that's relevant is the two major American companies. It's whoever is talking about wrestling, right? And the people you're talking with are probably only watching WWF, maybe WCW, depending on the era. I had friends who watched TNA before it was on cable, and I distinctly remember a guy trying to tell me about how low-key is the future of professional wrestling in like 2003 or something like that, because he's watching them on TNA and stuff like that. So, you know, now...
Interesting take. I mean, you can argue that style of wrestler has become very, very popular in this era. One who's quicker and striking based. But yeah, I'm sure you don't want to get caught up on low key in the first 5 minutes of our conversation. I
mean, you're not wrong, though. You're not wrong. He was technically ahead of his time in a lot of ways. And, you know, now... Today, it's one of those things where you don't have any excuses. You don't have any excuses not to watch NJPW. If you really want to, it's out there. If you really care about it, you know, I know myself, I'm guilty of just jumping on with basically Bullet Club Chris Jericho, right? Like, I'm 100% that demographic that they drew in by advertising the gaijin wrestler bullshit. So, it's struggling with feeling like a fake fan has made it difficult, because we've, just to spoil, because there's no kayfabe anymore, this is something we've tried to do in the past. This is something we've thought about doing, and it never clicks. And a big part of it is because when either of us are at our most devoted, maybe the other person isn't, or doesn't even have time, or, you know, there was a point where we used to watch wrestling with a group of like 10 plus people every week, or at least once a month. And we would watch that group slowly dwindle down to a couple of stoners who just happen to have it on the TV in the background while we're playing Overwatch or whatever the new fucking Xbox game was, right?
I agree. I think as we've gotten older and have seen so many different types of stories come through the wrestling medium, and to see such a dynamic and a difference between the current top contending promotions for your attention, it's so overwhelming that part of me feels like I've seen these stories before, or maybe in some cases the stories really aren't that important. And
Mhm.
wrestling's always had soap opera quality storytelling at its best, practically, if you ask me, um, because the story can only go so deep. But in this era, what's wild is that, I think everybody's still figuring out how to best tell their stories and what kind of characters are going to be the most prolific in their various promotions. I feel like everything's very fluid right now. You know what I mean? So it's
Yeah.
it's tough. It's tough to sink in your roots, and it's tough to really grab your attention with some notable exceptions. Of course, there's a couple really key great stories right now that are proving why it's exciting to be a wrestling fan still. I think the best year of wrestling's yet to come from WWE. Especially, I think 2023 is going to be WWE's best year with Triple H's first year at the helm. And I feel like last little bit before I let you take the reins again with AEW, they are poised to re-find the footing that they had when they first started. I think this past year really didn't help. This was the first year where AEW's paint showed signs of scratches, dents, and just overall problematic issues, wouldn't you say?
It's been a wild fucking year for AEW, hasn't it?
I mean, it was the first opportunity for them to fall off a certain pedestal. I remember the last time you and I tried to talk wrestling, one of our key topics was how AEW fans didn't need any justification to be completely enthralled with the product. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Everybody was over. Every match mattered to the fans anyway. And no matter what you did, you were going to get gigantic pops night in and night out. And I think this year was the first time where the fans and the leadership within AEW kind of were at an impasse at certain parts. Like it's kind of hard to cheer for the aftermath of Brawl Out, right? And it's,
It,
you know, go
it's
ahead.
the first time that they could do something wrong, because for a while
Yeah. Yeah.
AEW could do no wrong, and it was tough for me because it. So I think let's get onto some of the main topics here, because I want to focus our conversation on a timeline of sorts. This is our introductory podcast. Not everybody is going to know you or I, or our tastes or where we come from. And one of the broader subjects, one of the things I really want this podcast to achieve, is the fact that wrestling is in and of itself a medium. It is not the product
Right.
itself, right? It is the medium with which you tell those stories. And
Mm-hmm.
at least in my mind, wrestling has kind of always latched on to other styles of storytelling. Or when you mentioned the soap opera thing, it put the bug in the back of my head, because wrestling started out as
Mm-hmm.
sports presentation, but
Right.
it's a reality sports thing. It's still like the roots of reality TV in a lot of ways. And the
Mm-hmm.
the realness, so to speak, came from all, like, man, I watched earlier today. I didn't realize it was over an hour. It's Randy Savage, 29 years old, had to be in
Oh,
the fucking late 70s, on Cable 10. You can find this on YouTube. It's a Cable 10 interview with, I'm going to butcher the name, John Frail, I think. John Fraley, one of the two.
jeez.
Yeah, and it's Macho Man, no sunglasses. He's got a cabbie hat on. It's wild. It's such a time capsule. And the guy in the 1 hour interview, Macho Man Randy Savage, talks about baseball for like half of it, because that's his roots. That's his, I
Wow.
was a baseball player, and I was hitting home runs over 100 feet over the I was a good
Over
hitter.
100
Yeah.
feet.
He wasn't yeah,
Oh yeah.
he wasn't quite so animated yet, but I mean, he was intense. And like, the comments are like, if this was anything other than wrestling, people would be talking about how intense and crazy this guy is, and yet it's the
Mm.
most calm we've ever seen Randy Savage.
Ooh, yeah, well said. I mean, Randy Savage is one of those types of personalities who was born to be a wrestler, because that's where natural intensity can be most celebrated. You look at
Hmm.
who's rising in people's attention spans, it's the people who commit most thoroughly to their on-screen characters. Your MJFs, your Chris Jerichos, of course, and especially right now, Sami Zayn and Roman Reigns and the whole bloodline and the way they take themselves too seriously for school. Like, those are the people who are rising because their personalities are so intense, they shine straight through and they almost can't suppress them. And we've known for years how Sami Zayn especially is one of those people, kind of like DDP, who would overanalyze meticulous
Yep.
and to a T can rehearse in his mind exactly how this upcoming segment's going to go. And I think it's so great to see those characters rise to the top, regardless of their stature. I can go on and on about Sami Zayn, so we won't need much pushing.
Well, I think Sammy is a great capstone because, like, we start with the sports presentation, which, you know, is just kind of a buzzword at this point with wrestling.
Yeah. Hey, how about that ranking system in AEW, guys? Great sports presentation.
Yeah, let's not start with that. So transitioning from that, you mentioned soap opera stuff, which is what I would say the 90s became, because wrestling used to be, I'm going to say failed jocks. I'm going to be rude. I'm going to say failed jocks. And, you know, Randy Savage didn't make it in baseball. Goldberg didn't make it in football. Kevin Nash didn't make it in basketball. For one reason or another, they end up in wrestling. And so that locker room is full of jocks. It's full of athletes. It's full of guys who started working out to do sports and shit like that, you know, bodybuilding. And guys like Hulk Hogan, guys like Shawn Michaels, they're more of a performer aspect. And Hogan really bought into the reality TV elements, you know, once it began. Yeah, I wouldn't say he pioneered it, but he was definitely down to just jump on board with that kind of stuff. And that's and that's where you get like the South Park wrestling episode where they parody it with soap opera storylines, because you know, it went from being, okay, how do we latch on and sell wrestling? Oh, well, people like sports. They come to see live sporting events. And it's
pseudo competition.
And most of the TV is to sell your live events back then. Then we get reality TV. Why? Because reality TV is cheap to produce and it's weekly content. It's regular, weekly, cheap to produce content. That's what they needed in the 90s. Now, I would say we've gone... You know, I don't even know, and this is one of the things we'll talk about in just a minute here is, you know, then you get sort of like the PG era, you get like beyond reality TV, but still definitely influenced by, and that's my gray area. And then I'd say now we're at the theater nerd area where everyone has some kind of story to tell, everyone has some kind of character they want to build up, and they want to talk about all that stuff, but it never seems to get fully translated on TV for me. So that's... You know, that's my current disconnect as we talk, you know, and that's why I said Sami Zayn's like the perfect capstone, because he is the epitome of that theater kid who wants to have some driving force, some story behind, some planned shenanigans, you know, something like that.
The why matters so much. And I think the why is the best part of pro wrestling. The why it matters is why, I mean, whether it's symbolized by a championship belt as it most commonly is, or it's symbolized by a main event shot at WrestleMania, or a briefcase that you could cash in throughout the year, or feasts or famines, or, you know, like the gimmick, the why should I care about you is the part that I think helps wrestlers shine the brightest, as long as you're right, there's consistent development and highlighting of that intent from that character. You know, it's funny that we live in a world where Bray Wyatt can come out and ramble week in and week out and barely take half steps forward in his storytelling, yet compel a good, you know, percentage of his audience. And then you flip over to Twitter, and that's the only place where you're going to see Mustafa Ali highlight how, as a Pakistani American, he's been, you know, marginalized by his own people because of the way he looks his entire life, and how that's the only place you can go to get to know that man, because he's not getting his promos with a microphone in front of an audience every week. And you wonder, man, you can be so compelled by Mustafa with the right airtime, but we're watching Bray Wyatt hem and haw and still hanging on every word, waiting for, what's going to be a mediocre match when he gets in the ring. I mean, I
a
love Bray Wyatt.
guaranteed loss.
Well, no, I do think those days are going to be behind him. I do think
They
he's going
have
to
to be, right? They have to be,
or this is a waste of time. Yeah, absolutely. So I don't think Triple H is that dumb. As a matter of fact, Bray could be one of the most important characters in wrestling history for the next 5 to 10 years. And I think that's going to happen. But I feel
Right.
bad for those guys who have a compelling natural story who don't get that sliver of television to give us that reason to believe that why, so I'm sure you've got plenty to tangent off of from that.
Well, you talk about a compelling story. I want to start with our stories. We have a couple compelling stories to tell, and if you're going to be listening to this podcast, you'll probably want to understand where we're coming from, because when it comes to wrestling podcasts, there is basically two styles now. There is people from within the industry, and then there's fan content. There's so many podcasts coming out from wrestlers now. I think it's, what's his name, Matt Kuhn, who is doing like so many of them. He's just set up like this whole network where he's probably recording like 2 podcasts a day and making money hand over fist. They just debuted the FTR with Dax Harwood, which is it's a great listen, and it's kind of heartbreaking, and I won't spoil it because it's still relatively new. And have you heard it? Have you listened to it, the first episode?
I just remember reading the hot take that came out of it, where Dax was defending CM Punk recently after Brawl Out, and and I remember the headline was that CM Punk had responded with "duh,"
Right?
Gosh darn, what a no sell. But Dax's story, I think, involves. I can understand what might be involved with the heartbreak. I'm sure we'll touch on it in greater detail.
Well, yeah, like I said, I don't want to spoil it too much, but I will say this: there's multiple times throughout the podcast where he's upset that he's ruining the magic. He's upset that he's breaking kayfabe, and he's like, "Well, I guess this is why we're here." And for someone who puts family first the way that he does, he'd be absolutely stupid not to take the lucrative deal, you know what I mean? The lucrative offer that having this podcast offers him. I do think it's a little interesting that it's not the both of them, but maybe they're not as much of a package deal as like I assume it to be, right? So I
remember when Dax Harwood at the time, I mean I almost don't remember. I don't think I could remember what he was called in WWE anymore. Do you? Oh my goodness.
I thought it was
Wilder.
I thought it was Cash and Dawson.
Oh, Dash and that's right. Dash and Dawson, and Scott Dawson was his silly name. Yeah. But I remember when he debuted as a single star in NXT, and Dash Wilder did later, and then all of a sudden they were a tag team, becoming the Mechanists or the Throwback or whatever they ended up being before becoming the Revival and getting the push that they got. So you're right. I think there were 2 indie guys who found themselves in similar, cut from a similar cloth and believing in a similar ideal when it comes to tag team wrestling. And, they've gone on to be one of the most celebrated teams of our generation, and for good reason. I don't think they've touched a bad match, in about 5 years. And I have so much respect for Harwood, especially recently with what he's been doing with the character of like, I'm gonna beat you like a 10-year-old girl beats cancer, and I
fight like a 10-year-old girl.
Fight like a 10-year-old girl. Isn't that beautiful?
I love that,
moment. And I think that's the biggest reason why people have grown emotionally close to this team, despite them having one of the absolute most skin deep personas in wrestling. It's a beautiful reality underneath, a very, what's the word I'm looking for? Superficial presentation. Gotta love those guys.
Yeah, and so see how easy it is to get on tangents about wrestling. See how
it's my favorite thing.
See how effortless it is to just dive into any single topic. So to get us back on track here, let's talk about me and you just for a minute, in relations to wrestling.
Sure.
Tell me, Warren, how exactly did you get involved with wrestling? How did you become a fan of wrestling? Because I'll be honest, this is one of my favorite stories, and I'll probably force you to tell it in every form of medium I absolutely can.
I'm glad that you think of it as a good story.
It's fucking hilarious.
Well, I was like 8 or 9 years old, and my family was very, very observant of what I watched. So I was somebody who couldn't really even watch Power Rangers as a kid because my family thought the action would go to my head.
The fake flips and the sparks everywhere.
Yeah, man, they thought my brain was as putty as the bad guys, I guess. But I was actually exposed to wrestling through the video game, the iconic video game for wrestling fans, WWF No Mercy for the N64. I used to rent N64s through my family when I would behave myself and get good grades and do all my chores. And I would look so forward to getting to play those games. And I thought wrestling, honestly, was just a fabricated, silly cartoon video game thing. I didn't think it was real, even with all of the images that No Mercy utilizes to drive home who The Rock is, or Triple H, or Undertaker, right? I thought it was fake. I thought it was all, I mean, faker than fake. I mean, digitally created fake. Had no idea. And I fell in love with characters like The Godfather, who was a wrestling pimp, but I was too young to understand what that was. I fell in love with characters who were good in the video game, like Bradshaw of the APA, who went on to be John Bradshaw Layfield, and I was the only fan of that championship run, and I only liked him.
That's not true. I knew plenty of racists who were really big fans.
Oh, stop! Don't paint me that way. I'm not. We don't.
I didn't
my
say
story.
you were. I didn't say
Thank
you
you.
were. But
Thank you.
I knew more than one person who actually VCR'd on fucking VHS the
Great American Bash when he won the title.
No. It was a TV bit when he was kicking Mexicans in the literal ass across the border. He was telling them to go back to Mexico with the flashlight and kicking them in the ass. I know of at least 2 people who went out of their way to like DVR that. Well, VHS VCR.
That segment aged beautifully, didn't it?
Oh my god.
Yeah, I mean, for a guy who's already a backstage bully by reputation. But I digress. I loved Bradshaw because when you pressed A and B, the 2 attack buttons on the N64, he would perform the Bradshaw hammer, which in real life was when he would grab a guy and bend them over and smash his forearm on their back and they just hit the deck. But in this game, it was a striking move that if you connected would launch guys over the top rope. And it was like the only way I could beat one of the game's hardest modes, survival mode, right? So that's why Bradshaw was like my favorite wrestler growing up, not knowing that all this stuff was actually real. So one night, I was flipping through the channels and got lucky enough to land on SmackDown. I could almost pinpoint the actual day because the matchup only happened so many times, but it was Triple H versus The Godfather. And Triple H had come out first with Stephanie. I was like, oh my God, I know him. What's he doing with, like, I know her. What has happened? What? And then The Godfather comes out talking about pimping ain't easy and, hoes and marijuana and fat daddies and,
when he said roll a fatty, as a kid, I thought he was like making fun of fat people. I thought he was like beat up obese people, like, cause
lay them down on the ramp and roll them down to the ring, right?
Because there was an episode of Hey Arnold where the stoop kid says, "I'm gonna roll you down the street, fatty," talking to Harold, and like my kid brain was like, "Oh, that's what he's talking about, roll him down the street."
Dude, Stoop Kid's like the most underrated character in cartoon history. I love Hey Arnold. Great.
That was not an excuse to get on a Hey Arnold tangent.
But you're right. We need to reel it back already. I will say I made the horrible mistake of immediately running to the kitchen after watching this segment between Triple H and Godfather.
No, you didn't tell your parents, did you?
And I went, Mom!
No.
Mom, you won't believe it.
Why would you tell them?
You know the video game I've been playing with all of the pro wrestlers? It's real. The Godfather came out and he was talking about pimps and his hoe train, and I don't, what's that mean? And she goes, excuse me, you were watching what? And I was literally banned from watching wrestling that night up until literally the evening that WrestleMania 18 was broadcasted. I got to watch the Sunday Night Heat prior to that iconic pay-per-view. And that was, but that whole gap from 97 to 2002, I was only allowed to be a fan through the video games. But I was just so thrilled that it actually existed. And I was so excited for when I would finally get to be a fan for real, because my mom wasn't going to keep it from me. I had always grown up play fighting, like naturally, like teaching kids on the playground how to fake fight. And I had no idea where that came from. Like literally, I got groups of kids together, male and female, boy and girl. And I was like, let's play Tekken in real life.
Let's Tekken, but real.
Seriously. So this was made for me. This art form was totally made for me to be a fan of. And I was so grateful to finally open that door when I was allowed to. But yeah, I was banned from being a fan of my passion for the first 5 years. What about you? What is your quintessential, here's why I'm a wrestling fan story?
Yeah, so for me, it's super weird because my parents were kind of selective, I guess. They weren't like the most overprotective, but I was sheltered in really specific ways. So like, for example, I had no interest in any video game that involved guns. It was just like too realistic. There was no interest for me in shooting someone with like an actual gun.
Right.
I remember being mildly curious about the toy soldier games, the little green men, the little video game for the toy soldiers. But only because I thought maybe it's like, you know, animated cartoony, and like I never really had toy soldiers growing up as a kid, you know, stuff like that. So actual violence, like even like Tekken and like Clay Fighter did not appeal to me, because like I wanted to play Diddy Kong Racing, and I like the idea of stuff like Super Mario. Although it's super funny because I've completely 180'd. I suck at platformers. I play fighting games now. But yeah, it's so funny. I still really.
I mean, and you suck at those too. To be completely honest.
To be fair, 98% of people suck at fighting games. So
truth.
There is such a small. Anyway, so for me, the big thing for me was I got to have a TV in my room much sooner than most people, and I was just flipping through the channels, and the first thing I remember is I'm pretty sure it was actually a Mankind promo. It's Mankind in a ring, and I think it's like a boxing ring, and he's got like this gimp mask on, and it looks really weird. And I want to say that I had recently like played a boxing video game that like got me interested. And so I stopped because I thought it was boxing, and I'm like, this is really weird. And then and then, you know, I just end up watching like half an hour to an hour of it, whatever. I go to sleep. And it's sometimes, so that's like my very first introduction, something like that. And I managed to spin around to it. It's on USA Network, you know, like a couple more times. But what hooked me, what got me to go, okay, wait, seriously, what the fuck is this? Was a replay, a highlight replay from the pay-per-view the night before, which was Jeff Hardy doing the Whisper in the Wind off of a steel cage onto two people, one of which I found out later was his brother. It's actually a super funny, almost kayfabe breaking spot because he decides to jump on both guys.
Right.
And so that was it for me. It was like legit, like I flip on the channel and the first thing I see is him standing on top of this giant structure that I've never seen before. Cameras flashing everywhere, people losing their mind, and then he jumps off of it and crashes to the ground and everyone's rolling in pain, and you know, And I'm just
unbelievable.
Yeah, I'm just like, holy shit! Like you're allowed to do that?
Exactly.
Like,
what kind of boxing match is this?
Yeah.
What's remarkable, my friend, is the Edge and Christian and Hardy Boys match from WWF No Mercy, 1999. Literally, the pay-per-view that the game that I fell in love with wrestling through was named for and modeled after and based off of. Isn't that wild?
Exactly. That's why I love it. I love the stories so much because it's so. And I don't know when the first time I played No Mercy is, but I saved lunch money to rent it from Blockbuster. I didn't like.
Right.
My parents didn't really like police stuff that I did too much. Although they did, watch me. I just didn't know it as a kid. Like, for example, I rented. I had a guy rent me Serial Experiments Lane on VHS when I was like 12, which is way too early, right? But still one of my favorites to this day. But I do remember my parents being very confused about like the light censored nudity of anime and shit like that. Like, where there's no actual discerning features, but it is still like a naked frame of a human, right? If anyone's familiar with 90s anime, where they just basically erase all the body features.
Yeah, no nipples and no camel toe.
Right.
But all of the other shapes are there. I get it.
They don't even bother to put bubbles or like steam clouds back then. They're just like, nope, they're naked, but erase it. So
yeah, but
so like my parents would confront me about stuff like that, or they would just like keep an eye on things like that. But I was never getting pornographic sexual content. It was just like this stupid it's just in the intro for Lane for Serial Experiment. It's literally just in the intro, and it's a Matrix fucking style thing. It's a naked hooked up to wires kind of a thing. It's not even so it was a kind of thing where for me I was just so enthralled by like the physical acts. And so for me, growing up, and especially playing video games, I was the kid who was addicted to special rules matches. I was the kid who I almost never wanted to watch just a regular singles match. And because I watched almost exclusively WWF, I barely knew that WCW existed. And whenever it would be on TV, because it was people I didn't really recognize, or if I did recognize them, I was very confused. Like, I legitimately thought Goldberg and Stone Cold Steve Austin were the same person.
We're the same people. Me freaking too, man.
Because I had been introduced to Goldberg through the video game, not through watching it on TV.
Right. Absolutely. And everybody who's bald and with the goatee in that era looked alike, especially with 64, bit pixels.
Bald guy, goatee, black trunks, knee pads. Like, I was just like, this is just Stone Cold with gloves on.
Pretty much. I have to say, man, it's pretty funny. As good as No Mercy was, I mean, there was a WCW version that had come out previously that was almost as freaking good, right? I know we've spent a couple afternoons playing that one as well. I forget, WCW Warzone or something, I think it was. I could be totally wrong.
As long as it's not Backstage Assault, don't ever make me fucking play that game again.
Right. But it's amazing how important video games are to the fandom too, because I think, as we grew up and realized how fabricated the whole industry is to an extent, right? It's the storytelling that was the most important to us. And we both have an extremely different thought process on what makes quality stories, I would think.
Well, I just wanted to note really quick. I think what's really important about this discussion is it was never the storytelling for me as a kid. Like,
it was all physicality.
Right. And so this is one of the reasons I wanted to do this podcast, is because I think people kind of get lost in the sauce a little bit. And it's very easy for me to sit here and say, what is this trash on current TV, when in a 3-hour fucking wrestling product, a good half of it isn't for me. Right. A lot of it's not, and so
it's not my wrestling.
Right. And it's not meant for me. It's meant to bring in children. And while I don't think you necessarily need to be doing backyard Thanksgiving pumpkin matches every fucking year where a guy gets a pumpkin stuck on his head. There's there's people of all ages who do get a kick out of that. And so
they're here to tune in for the silliness.
Yeah. And so, I mean, that's its own discussion right there, is like, should you just make a separate show for that? But I do want to point out that, like, for me as a person, what has gotten me into wrestling, what has made me a fan, has changed and evolved. And that's, I think, part of it, because before it was all spectacle. I was that kid who there's a fucking, it's critically panned now. It's like, I think it's WrestleMania 18. It might be 17, 18, 19, but it's in that hardcore era where there has to be a hardcore match every pay-per-view. There has to be something hardcore. And it's the hardcore battle royale where, like, nobody spends any time in the ring.
I have to talk on this because, yes, WrestleMania 17, hardcore battle royal, absolute total cluster F, right?
They botched the finish where it's like he smashes a jar full of candy over his head or something.
Yeah, and Hardcore Holly and Crash Holly were really the centerpiece of that entire thing and their cousin rivalry, which I gotta say though, you can talk about that battle royal more if you want to, but if you don't want to, I want to admit that you have an absolutely awesome point. The physical feats are what brought you into it, but my favorite part of early wrestling fandom was the hardcore matches. I did like the extreme silliness of whacking each other over the head, busting each other open, and having blood thrown all over the place. I thought that stuff was cool. I thought it was awesome. And it's funny because in No Mercy, my favorite mode was the Royal Rumble mode, but I would turn off over the top eliminations and I would make it a giant 40-person hardcore match. And
I didn't even know you could do that in that game.
Oh, it was so much fun. Inevitably, at some point, all four characters would be somewhere backstage beating the crap out of each other. And I would only do like knockouts only. You had to be completely incapacitated. That's one of my favorite things about No Mercy. But even now, in today's era, nobody's taken that silliness you can create by messing with the match rules and create these wonderful ideas I would have had as a kid. But it was all about hardcore wrestling. For you, it was about the flippy dippy stuff, right?
Well, no, hold on. First of all, Here Comes the Pain literally copied your idea. They made a whole mode of exactly that.
The slobber knocker.
Yeah,
they just didn't do it right.
It's literally just you're in backstage areas and you have to KO people. So
one at a time. That's boring.
It was supposed to be a single player, but I did just want to point out they did at least copy some bit of the idea. But for me, I've never identified with flippy dippy stuff, and I will die on this hill that Jeff Hardy's not a flippy dippy wrestler. Jeff Hardy is not he's not an acrobat wrestler. He's an extreme wrestler who uses high flying in the extreme sense. He is a high risk specific type of guy, and I will forever defend that there is separate niches between high flying aerial acrobatics and extreme wrestling. And there's obviously some overlap for sure. There's plenty of guys who did flippy dippy stuff in ECW while being extreme, and this is why Jeff Hardy, in my opinion, will go down as the greatest high risk wrestler of all time. It was never about how good his swanton dive looks. It was never about how graceful he is soaring through the air to do a whisper in the wind. It was never about how agile he is at running up those ropes and doing that backflip and doing the inverted body block or any of that shit. It was never about how smooth of a moonsault even that Matt Hardy does. It was always about putting himself at risk, putting his body on the line to close the gap between him and more skilled or more tough or more strong,
powerful,
more powerful wrestlers. And that is an element that I don't know if you can preserve in wrestling, because a lot of the stuff you and I really like or that did get us hooked, a lot of the stuff from the Attitude Era you just can't do anymore because of safety. So I don't know if I want guys doing that shit anymore, but I can 100% defend the fact that it was never about him being this great. Like again, it's a cheap shot, but look at Rey Mysterio and look at Jeff Hardy,
or Ricochet.
You know, both are high flyers, but one is a high risk guy. The other is I'm going to do this as safe as possible because I'm 90 pounds, and the other guy is actually doing all the work.
No, you're totally right. I respect what you're saying. There is a very distinct difference between Jeff Hardy's high risk style and the majority of what became, you know, modern or historic lucha libre and cruiserweight wrestling. He was a high risk character, and there's, you know, that's what has made him stand out for so many wrestlers, and has made his impersonators, the people who followed in his footsteps, so equally distinctive. I don't think anybody has done it quite like Jeff Hardy outside of maybe Darby Allin in his own way. Super similar kind of inspiration there.
I mean,
tweaked a little bit to include Skater and Punk.
How many
undertones,
people?
But go ahead.
How many people have done a dive off a giant ladder through a table? Almost everybody. Fucking every, you know, CM Punk's done it multiple times. Kofi Kingston's done a boom drop through a table. You know, everybody who's pretty much anybody who's been a world champ at this point and isn't fucking 7 feet tall has jumped off a ladder through a table on the outside in a Money in the Bank style fucking event, or put a guy through ladders. Now they got wooden ladders they're breaking to do this shit. But whenever Jeff Hardy does it, the commentary is completely different. Whenever,
and boy, do they put those over. Those moments get put over so well by commentary. Go for it. I know. I get where you're going.
Whenever, you know, when you know, and a big part of it too is because it's tag team wrestling. You know, a lot of it, like there's so many different like minute layers that I'm not going to necessarily give them credit for like they planned, but you know, does add up to the story and things like that. Where if Jeff can take out two people, it's fine to sacrifice himself because he has a teammate who can climb the ladder instead, which is the ending of, in my opinion, the best actual triple tag team ladder match of all time. Man. And so so I just, you know, it's important to me to make those distinctions because I've now seen so many wrestlers do a nearly identical spot, but yet every time Jeff Hardy did it, it felt like he was legitimately sacrificing himself to get towards an end goal until the Hardy Boys return at that WrestleMania, because after that, they just become a sideshow attraction, and Jeff's just taking Edge out in the middle of a ladder match because that's what Jeff does, and it just loses all meaning, right? So
that's true. Yeah. That run was a little bit of a disappointment, to say the least, but that return was such an amazing moment. I couldn't help but, you know, it's a weird dynamic shift. You had challenged me to think of anybody who was main eventing, you know, over the years who were not doing those kinds of spots. And there is one name that comes to mind. I'll just touch on it, see if you get any rise out of it. But Booker T was historically terrified of doing ladder spots. And
you're talking about the guy who did the Houston Hangover?
Right. He hates heights. He did like that. He did that early in his career, but he didn't do the Houston Hangover in the latter like 15 years of his career. And he didn't participate in a ladder match until very late in his run, I think during the Keen Booker phase. And I remember literally reading an interview where he's like, I just had to get that chip off my shoulder, I guess, or get that fear exercised, you know, and finally face this opportunity to put somebody over in a more, you know, personally terrifying match. I thought that was always interesting. It made me think, man, how did he, you know, you didn't have to do these things to rise up the card, but guys like Jeff Hardy did change the way you look at those opportunities for sure.
Yeah. And it's, you know, again, so many of these are like topics you could do an entire podcast on, where it's like,
sure.
It's the kind of thing where everyone's a generalist now. Everyone does everything now.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
You get into Yeah, especially in a place like AEW,
EW.
you can guarantee that basically everybody in a 6-man ladder match is going to do the dive. Whereas in WWE, it started out by being like 1 or 2, and then it was like 4 out of 6, and now we're, sometimes it's all 6. Sometimes you have like a Booker T or like a Ryback style character who might not take the dive, but even Ryback will bump off the ladder through the tables at the TLC event. You'll still get those bumps out of those guys.
His shoulder blades are thicker than most people's bodies, so he can take that stuff very easily, comparatively speaking. But I'm sure if he heard this, he'd be like, easy my ass.
Yeah. If he heard it, he'd sue because I used the word Ryback and he now gets that trademark. So
feed me more. Yeah, we should be careful. I don't want to owe him royalties on our first show.
That'd be rough. So I gotta go into editing and take back out the No Mercy soundtrack. Got it.
No, don't take it.
So let's pivot real quick. Let's transition a bit because for me, it like I said, it was a lot of the spectacle. It was a lot of specific moments. As a kid, I wasn't really able to follow all the storylines, but I certainly recognized when someone throws a title belt in a river. I was super hyped for the stupidest matches. It's like Al Snow and Hardcore Holly pinning each other in a creek. I was just
about to say that.
It's iconic.
When there's water involved in the scenario, I'm there for it. Like, let's go. Yeah. But you're right. That Al Snow Hardcore Holly match is way more memorable than it has any right to be, for sure.
The other one is the empty arena last man standing, I think it is, where he uses the forklift. Yeah, he uses the forklift and they're fighting all throughout the arena.
Wasn't that done during a halftime show for the Super Bowl?
I'm 90% sure, it was halftime heat.
Ooh, wild, right?
It was halftime heat, and they're like, well, we're not going to try and book a fucking show during the Super Bowl.
No.
And that's just kind of stuff you don't get anymore because of the way industry and business works. And so the last one I want to touch on is the first pay-per-view I ever got to watch.
Sure.
I'm going to say it's Judgment Day 2000, but someone will probably have to correct me in the comments because as much as I know all this stuff, it does get jumbled together in my head. But it is specifically the Iron Man match, The Rock versus Triple H. And at the time, I'm like the biggest Triple H fan. I'm huge on Triple H. I don't like The Rock. My parents don't know this because when we're at the pool, we have like a community pool. Everyone does all the kids do the people's elbow into the pool. Like you do wrestling moves into the pool, right? And
oh man,
kids,
a million times.
Kids love to run on that slick, wet surface and act like they're bouncing off a rope, which there's nothing there to support you. So of course you're going to slip and fall on your ass. And then do the electrifying elbow drop because The Rock's the biggest thing ever. And they saw me do that a couple times. So they'll never believe me when I say that I was a big fan of Triple H and not that big on The Rock, but I wasn't allowed to pedigree other kids into the pool, or I would have.
No.
So
there's something a little dangerous about falling face first, allegedly, right? But I was guilty of that too, man. I did swanton bombs off diving boards.
Yep.
Or and choke slams, spears. Backflip. You name it.
You're not doing a backflip. You're doing a moonsault, right? You're just gonna belly.
Oh my goodness.
It.
I could never backflip. Still can't backflip. I look a bit like Matt Hardy, as you were mentioning before.
I can only do it into a pool.
Good for you, man. I don't know how you pull that off.
Yeah.
But actually, you're actually right on the money. That was Judgment Day 2000. Couldn't help it. I'll be that wrestle nerd. What about that match? Would you say locked in your fandom for the foreseeable future?
Well, so I was already a super big fan by that point. I was already like, because the whole thing was, I think I got it as like, I can't remember the month, but I got it as like an early birthday present or something like that. Like my family growing up.
Wow. Happy birthday. You're going to watch the pay-per-view?
Yeah. Like for me growing up, we never celebrated anything at the right time because we didn't have money during Christmas. Me and my sister would oftentimes get birthday presents together because my sister's birthday is when tax season is, and my birthday is fucking not. My birthday is in August, so it's
after you've already blown the fun.
Right. So, for two people, for two low income people with two kids, my sister's birthday is when we'd always get presents together. And part of it was when you have two kids, you have to get something for each kid. Whenever one kid gets something, the other kid has to get something. It's just how it is. At least I think, unless you have like the world's greatest kids who are somehow more mature than any fucking pair of children I've ever met. Like you gotta get something for both. So I remember that's what I'd asked for. And probably because it was March, it was like hype, WrestleMania season that I was asking for stuff. And they were like, maybe. And I think part of it was they didn't know how to order it yet, or we might not have even had cable, blah, blah, blah. Point is, by the time Judgment Day rolls around is when they say yes. And it's probably when I was begging for it so much because they hyped up this Iron Man match above all else.
Sure.
The Judgment Day, vignettes and all this stuff that they previewed for it just looks so different and so wild. And I was certainly not disappointed by the stage structure, by the promos, I still love that opening package. I forgot about it from when I first watched it, and I revisited it when the network came out, and I was like, this is actually so dope, where it's like your heart beats so many times in an hour, and you'll blink so many times, and so many people die in an hour, and you think about sex so many times, it's all these little things that's trying to show you just how long an hour actually is.
Yeah, they establish those video packages always establish excellent whys for the matches that matter, and that was a really good build, wasn't it?
Yeah,
it's a lot of hype for a contest that, as I'm watching some highlights here, was overproduced to the nines, my friend.
It's overbooked is definitely something you could say about it. It's the kind of thing where it's similar, it's second only to the Royal Rumble stats, right? Like if you're a stat nerd, if you're an objective information nerd, you kind of love stuff with numbers. So, but the main thing was the spectacle becomes the debut of Biker Taker. And I did not recognize that character whatsoever.
Wild.
They're saying it's the Undertaker, and I'm, as a kid, I'm probably just like, who's this? But seeing a dude ride in on a motorcycle with the children screaming and everything's being interrupted, and if I were as old as I am now, if they tried to do something like that today, I'd be like, oh, here comes another run. I'm already upset at how many times bloodline matches actually just end with a bland, boring run-in,
sticking their nose in it. Yeah, well, I mean, that's been a part of wrestling storytelling for as long as I've known to be a fan. I hear you.
But the difference is that there is a divergent outcome from the character motives. Because if you remember, or if you're watching the highlights, I guess, Undertaker has beef with McMahon Helmsley. He doesn't really have beef with The Rock, and he's upset at all this shit that they're doing to The Rock. It's like 7-on-1. It's like Shawn Michaels is Triple H's friend, but he's been calling it pretty much down the middle. There's that beef throughout it, right? And again, overbooked to hell. It's like Vince and Shane and Stephanie and Pat Patterson and Gerald Briscoe and the fucking DX flunk, everyone is there, and The Rock is just trying to hold on, and it's tied up, and the Undertaker debuts, and everyone loses their shit.
Yeah,
you think
100%.
You would think the Beatles showed up, and he gets in the ring and he's clearing house. He's fucking, and I'll say this: if you go back and watch it, the DX guys got to work on their timing. They're waiting to get hit. But
no kidding. Yes.
Yeah, it's not
so sloppy.
It's not, I mean, it's like 5 guys in a ring. It's the anime thing where it's you got to take them on one at a time, right?
Triple H just waving them over to get knocked out by Undertaker. Your turn.
Yeah. And it's so hard. Well, I mean, and you could sell it as fear, like you're afraid of the Undertaker. You don't want to be the guy who steps up. So, but it's so hard to get all this timing down right, and they get the timing pretty good, I'd say, for like it's justifiably good, is what I'll say. Like
Sure.
and you know, for those,
the end result is amazing. You see fans really emotionally wrapped up in that one.
Well, and so for those who don't know, what ends up happening is because the Undertaker chokeslams Triple H, and the whole time the special guest referee Shawn Michaels is in Undertaker's face saying, "No, don't do it, don't do it. I'll have to call the fall. I'll have to ring the bell. I'll have to DQ him." But because he chokeslams him with like 3 seconds left on the clock, and then after the clock runs out, picks him up and tombstones his ass, Shawn Michaels reluctantly, with his head in his hands, has to award a DQ pinfall to Triple H. And The Rock gets fucking screwed. And it's one of those things where like it's cheap. It's not a pinfall. It's not a, you know, whatever you want to say. It's it is a DQ, but it's not. It's so out of the ordinary.
It protects the company's biggest babyface. The returning guy, in this case, he wasn't a legend yet, but everybody loved The Undertaker and everybody lost it for this new incarnation, right? He gets to show up and have an impact. It's so
sick. Before then, how many guys drove to the ring on a motorcycle?
Literally zilch, right?
I would assume if anyone did, Hulk Hogan did.
Well, you look at
maybe, Legion of Doom. Legion of Doom, I think, actually did.
I mean,
Legion of Doom probably
in a forgettable way, I suppose, because I don't recall. I mean, the coolest entrances.
It became Undertaker's gimmick for sure. I just wouldn't be surprised if Legion of Doom did it once or twice.
It's not American Badass Taker; it's Biker Taker for many people, right?
True.
So I was trying to make the point that this returning, main event player who can clean house still gets the big impact in the match, but they can still award it to the bad guy. I mean, what a heat-creating moment, right? That cemented Triple H to be prepared to take on all comers until he started to finally, slow down how important he was to the business around 2010, I'd say, right? Is when he stopped being like a top tier, I'm going to win the title a lot kind of guy. Could be wrong. Maybe 2011. But, great storytelling there. I mean,
so the important thing about it is the ramifications aren't immediate. There's so many run-ins and there's so many finishes, if whatever you want to say, that people get upset about because they don't change anything. It doesn't change the status quo. The characters don't evolve. There is no new wrinkle. That was the issue with the NWO run-ins. That's the problem with the Judgment Day versus the OC club or whatever, the OG club right now, is that like no matter what they do, nothing changes. The status quo just stays the same. And this was a bullshit, overbooked finish that was sloppy, but still still had that sloppy, real chaotic. Yeah, it still was chaotic enough. And the main thing is, afterwards, what do you have? You have a completely different dynamic. The Rock is upset at Undertaker. Undertaker's upset at Shawn Michaels. The Rock is probably upset at Shawn Michaels too. Shawn Michaels now just pissed off his friend Triple H, so Triple H is pissed off at Shawn Michaels. Shawn Michaels isn't a wrestler though, so you can't take it out on him. So those guys got to figure it out some other. You know what I mean? Like it kept a guy who wasn't even
play with.
Yeah, it gave a guy who wasn't even a wrestler like so many different wrinkles within relationships to deal with and stuff like that. And it's the kind of thing where you could say nothing was settled, but new stories were created.
I'll tell you what, if wrestling, and its characters are what create legend, I think it's the relationships between those characters that create the memories. All of the best. Go ahead.
I was going to say that's that soap opera influence.
Amazing. Where exactly.
It's no longer about like, oh, who's the champion necessarily. It's about what you did to me and my own. It's about our relationship and how it strained and the different things where, previously to that, it was always, I'm the tough guy and I can prove it because I have a title belt, and that's what it's about. It's a sport. It's about being the champion. It's the difference between being a big fish in a little pond and being on a championship team in a real sport, and so that's exactly how I feel about it, where I feel like we're missing that today. I listened to guys, again, just to reference it because it's so recent, the Dax Harwood podcast, where he talks about, like, I'm telling the story where if I tap out, I chose to tap out, and I know throughout this match I can deliver on a story that tells the audience why my character would tap out here in this scenario, and I can get them on my side and feel sympathy for me. And, like, I hate to say it, I mean, I haven't watched every single one of his matches. I'm not a Dax Harwood connoisseur, I'm not a professor on his stuff, but I've never gotten that from him. I've never got, because it's so contained typically to one match. It's not contained to this big buildup, and it's supposed to be like, I care that he's getting suplexed or put in a sharpshooter. Like, it's a microcosm, I feel. And that's sort of rough, because in today's day and age, guys are wrestling everywhere, all over the world. They're wrestling so many people. There's not time to tell all these long stories. We started off this podcast by talking about how it's impossible to take it all in. So it's very possible I'm just missing it. You know what I mean? I watched the one match. It's like 12 minutes on TV. It ends in a tap out, and I didn't get from it this incredible story of a man's struggle and his will being broken and, all these things I'm supposed to sympathize with. I'm just not invested because it's a one-off match, and I've been trained through years and years that it's the build up to the pay-per-view, which is just not the formula anymore.
Oh, I wish it would be a focus, to be honest with you. I wish it was more of a priority. I think that's why WWE is winning the race right now in overall quality, by the way, is because they do. I think Triple H is one of the few people in wrestling history, or one of the first people in wrestling history, to really capitalize on the relationships within the meta to make it big. Like, remember, so many of the things he's proud of is like the NWO versus DX moment that happened at WrestleMania when he was wrestling Sting, right?
Oh, that shit was so corny.
That was more overbooked, right?
That was pointlessly overbooked. Why would Sting be hanging out with the? Don't get me started.
I know. Well, I mean, because they were all from WCW, but those relationships was still enough to create that moment. He
still threw up the click sign. I mean,
well, of course,
that's not something Steve Borden can do.
At least not with integrity. Then there's the of course, Triple H was and Shawn Michaels were the nucleus of so much excellent storytelling across several decades. The relationships between Rock and Austin, that's when there were rivalries, of course, that were around prior to Triple H's involvement, but the commentary built them up. And I feel like Triple H was the first to understand the meta relationships and how they can truly create so much more meaning for the fans who care about the product and understand its true nature. And I think that's what he's writing right now. I mean, look at the relationship between Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn being such an undercurrent of so much of wrestling content right now. Or his own relationship with Sheamus. The big reason why Sheamus is probably being treated with more respect now than he has been in previous years is because he was a Triple H guy coming up around the 2012 era, right? And having his best moments then in his youth anyway. So it's crazy how... That's why I think WWE is just going to get better. Just better stories because of that relationship awareness. And WWE is going to do it better. You look at AEW's pay-per-views. Last point. I'll give it right back. I promise. I just wanted to pop a cork real quick. AEW pay-per-views are still like thrown together at the last minute. And that's precisely to what you're saying. That does like let air out of the balloon of the build. For me personally, I want there to be more of the march to those important nights on the calendar. Being quiet now.
Well, The big thing for me, with current wrestling, at least as far as I watch it, is every time I tune in, it's they mention the history between these two wrestlers, and like it's cool to not ignore it, but it's like
Right.
everybody has feuded with everybody at some point. Everybody has been involved with everybody in some way, in some capacity. And in AEW, it'll be like these guys had a feud in a fucking indie promotion 12 years. You know, the most obvious example, I guess, would probably be the Claudio Castagnoli and Eddie Kingston thing, where they were like, "Oh, can you trust them?" and blah. And then, at least as far as I watched, you know, because I was involved at the time, I was trying to stay current with that stuff. Like they didn't actually go forward with any of it, because the Eddie Kingston and Claudio Castagnoli storyline from the
way back in the day.
Yeah, I was gonna try and name the promotion, but I fucking lost it.
Yeah,
but the whole thing was Claudio was an insider agent. He was a betrayer. He was a traitor agent for a faction. Like he usurped the rest of the Federation to, you know, while being like a double agent or whatever. And that's why Eddie was so big on like, can I trust you, or can he be trusted? Blah blah blah. And like. And like they didn't really go anywhere with that, but they sure as fuck talked about it forever, and they sure as fuck made it seem like it was like supposed to be a part of the story. But as someone who didn't watch that storyline, as someone who then had to go fucking Google, like I'm tired of AEW giving me homework to enjoy a match.
Right, I get what you mean. It didn't translate in the match, right?
Like if you're someone who recognizes that stuff and they play off of it. Wow, beautiful. But for the commentary to just constantly be referencing it and have literally nothing else to talk about, WWE does it too. They'll do it too. Anytime there's like a random one-off tag team match, it'll be like, oh, well, and you'll remember that 6 weeks ago, Baron Corbin dumped dog food on this guy's head or some shit. And it's like, okay, cool. Are they going to reignite that feud? No, they're going to go their separate ways after this. Like, who gives a shit? You know, I'm kind of tired of that. Like, it was cool at first when people were like, hey, they're finally acknowledging past storylines, or like they're finally, you know, acknowledging like past things. But like they always did the important ones. You know, they would always bring up like, oh, these guys have met in WrestleMania before. Or, you know, if it was like a big match, JR and the King would always bring up like old history of something that was potentially relevant, you know, or like something to set the scene if it was relevant to now. Now they're just like, hey, remember that time these two guys fought? Like,
I think we're blurring the lines now into the art of commentating too, or the people who feed the commentator lines. I think Triple H does grasp that quite well. And it shows in the way Michael Cole has improved as a presented character since Trips took over.
Man, every time I tune in, Michael Cole's not even on the show. It's some random new dude.
Well,
like,
yeah, I mean,
the commentary's been all over the place when I tune in, so that's fair. Which, you know, I mean, it's commentary's super tough. Also, rest in peace to Don West. Now that you
I did want to say that. Yeah, that's really, really, really sad to hear that.
Completely dates this episode.
True. Yeah. The modern time has been exposed. But you've been doing a good job time stamping it throughout, talking about some of the more current moments. I mean, I did want to ask this: do I get to share my first pay-per-view?
Well, yeah, I was going to get to that. You know, I mean, we are long-winded, but you know that was going to be the next transition.
Well, did you have anything else to touch on? You know, from the Judgment Day 2000.
No,
branch of the storyline.
I just want to reinforce that the main point I was trying to make with that is that as a kid, it was all spectacle for me. It wasn't necessarily character relationships or storylines. It's the fact that there was worthwhile spectacle that emboldened those things. You know, again, I referenced like the throwing the title in the river. It's like, I didn't really follow that whole storyline, but that one spectacle moment that caps it off is
right.
That's what people remember. It's the very, you know, very specific moments, but you know,
Agreed.
You know,
And that's
well, and
Go ahead.
it was just it was pretty close to when I got really hooked on wrestling, because that was also a pay-per-view spectacle moment that people reference, that people put in highlight packages to this day. So, you know, what was your first pay-per-view?
Yeah, I'd love to share. I did want to take that though for a second and show that that is something that I think where we converge is it's the celebration of the moments. It's the celebration of the presentation. Sometimes it's just mere seconds that you remember, um not necessarily the lawn run and the lawn game. I will say that like entrances for me, and I'm sure you know this already about me, but entrances are one of my favorite parts of wrestling because those can be such memorable moments depending on the character, especially your monster characters, your Undertakers, your Bray Wyatt Fiends, especially. You
Now,
know,
are you talking about specifically like a special pay-per-view entrance, or are you just talking in general?
just in general for now. But
Okay. Because I'm
I
really
will
big. I'm really big on the unique special event entrances, but I'm probably lower than the average person on your regular entrance. You know what I mean?
Sure. I'm not saying there's definitely entrances that fall flat and you can skip through them. It's the ones that they successfully create an aura for.
Yeah.
There are seconds in wrestling that stand still in my brain that just blaze out. As a matter of fact, the return of Jeff and Matt at WrestleMania when the crowd lost their ish, like that's burned into my brain. The look on Matt's as he, played to the crowd and deleted, and burned into my brain are this moment from my first pro wrestling pay-per-view, which was WrestleMania 19 in Seattle.
Damn, you got
Which,
your first pay-per-view as a WrestleMania? Fucking rich kid.
well, it took a year after finally being allowed to watch the content to begin with before,
True.
I really knocked on that door for a whole year. Like, thanks for letting me watch it on TV, Mom and Dad, but can we do a WrestleMania?
Just
And
remember, it's your fault for going and snitching on yourself.
oh, so stupid. I'm so good at self-sabotage, it's ridiculous. Honesty is my best policy, but it's also the most detrimental at times. But yeah, WrestleMania 19 culminated in Brock versus Kurt, and I of course remember the moment where Brock, this behemoth of a man who hadn't done anything like this to this point, performs or attempts to perform a shooting star press and narrowly misses dying, but breaks his neck in the process. In the same match where Kurt is also nursing said broken neck. And they've been going on for like 30 minutes in there. Unbelievable match. But that moment burned into my brain as another example. I loved WrestleMania 19. I think many might regard it as maybe the second or third best WrestleMania of all time to this point. Be fun to debate that.
It's the best video game for entrances. I'll sit by that. It has a weirdly in-depth entrance creator for the creator wrestler.
Oh my god, that was a GameCube game, wasn't it?
Yeah, WrestleMania 19 had the weirdest single-player mode, which is what everyone focuses on. But I was super into the create an entrance specifically for that game only.
Oh my god, it's all about WWF Raw 2 for that.
Probably.
If I'm being honest, you could upload music into your Xbox and play it for your entrance theme at Lawn Freaking Last. That was what mattered. You could time the lighting, you could time the pyro, you could time the camera cuts. Like that was that was ahead of its time. That Raw 2 for me. But
it sounds like Raw 2 has everything that 19 had, but also had the music, so it probably wins on that front.
Right, got ya. But WrestleMania 19 as a pay-per-view had several really awesome burnable moments and a memorable soundtrack, like from Limp Bizkit that year.
It's depressing how much Limp Bizkit I've listened to only because of wrestling.
That had, let me see, Hogan versus
19?
Vince McMahon in a street fight, right?
19's the most iconic in my head, actually.
Good. Am I wrong then about my memory on that matchup? I think it was Hogan and Vince in a street fight.
That should be the one, yeah. It is maybe like the worst Undertaker match I've ever seen at Mania. And yet I was still here for it because I had seen him drive the motorcycle through Safeco Field was tight.
And here comes Fred Durst doing, keep rolling, which is one of the best theme songs, especially from a mainstream artist to be on anybody's. I think so.
That was carried by how cool Undertaker on a motorcycle is. I'm sorry.
Well, and the camera shots. You're right. Very iconic. And I think that match was it was supposed to be a tag team match. A-Train and Big Show versus Nathan Jones, who was debuting, but didn't debut because he was still trash, and The Undertaker. And The Undertaker just ended up winning, if I remember.
I thought it was A-Train and Nathan versus Taker, but it's definitely A-Train, Undertaker, and someone very forgettable, right?
Right. Well, poor Big Show. Despite his size, man, we can forget so many of his moments. But another moment burned into my brain in wrestling history, the kick between the legs from Chris Jericho after his salty loss to Shawn Michaels.
Still the best WrestleMania match, actually.
I think so. Yeah, certainly my childhood's Flair Steamboat, or let's see, Bulldog and Brett, or so many matches will not live up to Jericho and Shawn in 19. So yeah, that was my pay-per-view. It was the city I was born in, which didn't matter to me much at the time, Seattle. It was the sheer scale of everything, the production value of the stage, the fantastic contests, and then the Triple H and Booker T contest too.
Very controversial match 20 years later, huh?
Yeah, because Triple H, really had the opportunity to create a star there, and I'm glad Booker eventually got the Keen Booker, phase of his career. But yeah, we don't need to. I'm sure we don't need to weigh in too hard on that. It would have been a good moment for him. But yeah, I love that pay-per-view. Quality matches from top to bottom. Such a packed card. I remember Chris Benoit was teaming with Rhino in that pay-per-view in like a 4-team fatal 4-way for the tag titles that included, let's see, it was Chris and Rhino. It was Los Luchadors, right? It was the world's greatest tag team. I was such a Shelton Benjamin mark, And the 4th team, I think, was Too Cool, right? Kishi and Scotty. Maybe I'm getting them blended, but I love Scotty Too Hotty growing up too.
You said Los Luchadors?
Did I say Los Luchadors?
You said Los Luchadors.
Were they not? Los Guerreros. My bad.
Yeah,
guys.
Los Guerreros.
My bad. I mean, how can I do that? Blasphemy, right? My bad. But such a good year for wrestling, and I think that carried. I mean, that was my childhood phase at its peak, because that same time next year, I think that was when guys like Chris and Eddie were finally rising to the top, and that was the peak. That was the peak, was 204 for childhood wrestling, because then all of the reality of real life started to get into it with the deaths of ABC, and we tangent time.
Yeah, I was gonna say 20 was my first Mania. I was hanging out with kids much older than me, adults at that time. I was like 13, hanging out with 18, 19-year-olds who had like just graduated high school and just moved out and had their first jobs and crap like that, and
more moments to burn into your brain, right? How about the moment of Edge spearing Mick through the flaming table? Burned into your brain.
Fucking hated that match so much. I was such a mark. I was so upset as a kid. That wasn't then, was it? Because you know what? That wasn't the one. Was that because 21? It had to be, because Mick, because WrestleMania went Hollywood, right? That was that one. Mick was with The Rock doing Rock and Sock versus Evolution. Still upset about that, by the way.
Who wouldn't be? Because, good old, I think Mick had to eat the pin.
Yeah, so I didn't like, it was definitely the Randy Orton feud that spiraled into a tag team match, which I was going to correct you on. I was just going to bitch about the Edge thing, because everyone loves that in retrospect. But so 2 years in a row, as a kid, again, mind you, I'm 13 at most of this. I'm like 12, 13. And I'm getting Mick Foley is the Mankind character that I first saw, right? It's the first thing I ever saw that I was like, let me stop and watch this wrestling stuff. Because, like, I'm sure I had seen wrestling in, like, cartoons or, like, heard the name Hulk Hogan, you know, seen guys with title belts and underwear parodied in other medium and stuff. But that Mankind character was the first thing I ever saw and went, like, this is weird. Like, let me find out what's happening in this boxing ring. And
he was makes you realize how much we think how Bray Wyatt was inspired by Undertaker. I have to think he's even more inspired by Mick. But yeah,
as far as like the multiple personality stuff goes, for sure. I think people want him. I think people want him to be a spiritual successor to the Undertaker role because of the supernaturalness.
And there's still hope, unless it's Uncle Howdy who's going to do that. But I know that was a weird thing to slide in there. But it's true that, you know, that's the stuff that makes you stop and go, what the fuck is this? Is when somebody's so passionately discussing vaguely these really adult themes, these really like, oh, you know, I'm in this twisted place in my brain, and I will find the way to exercise my demons on your face, you know.
I don't even think I got to hear Mick Foley talk as Mankind like ever until later. He was just in the ring. That's what I'm saying. Like, that's what I mean when, like, it's not for us anymore. Like, you look at stuff and, like, what works in wrestling is nebulous and small and abstract, and it's just the look. Like, we complain about people who get pushed just for their look. I have to admit that it's just the look for Mankind. It was just him sitting in a corner. I don't even think he had the urn yet. He was, you know, have a nice day with the shirt and tie. But
him rocking back and forth, his commitment to the character.
Yeah. So anyway, so the point is when Mick Foley, I'm being gassed up by a friend of mine who's like my best friend at the time, who's, you know, the biggest wrestling nerd, who I'm watching these events at his house because he's paying, you know, everyone's chipping in to get the pay-per-views and get pizza and stuff. And he's a way bigger Mick Foley fan than I am. And he's gassed me up on Mick at this point and showed me so much stuff to be a fan of. And I'm watching Randy Orton spit in his face and all this other stuff, and they're going hardcore. And in my head, as a kid, I'm like, well, this is Mick Foley's world. This is his realm. This is the same reason why I didn't like the Edge match finish at the time. This is why, because as a kid, like, I don't understand the business elements of this. I don't understand that Mick's here to put these guys over. And it didn't put them up. It just, and it worked, you know, again, as a super mark, it got major heat for Randy Orton from me, because I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh, this guy's going to get his comeuppance. Oh, we've got The Rock here. I don't like The Rock, but there's no way the fucking Rock loses to these guys too, you know? It's like, you're calling in The Rock just to lose from Hollywood? Like, all this shit, like, compounded. And so I really hated those matches as a kid, but I can admit that it's like the mark element, you know, just kind of, even as someone who knows it's fake at that point, like, the mark element's a little too real, because to me it's like, you know, like, it's really upsetting when guys have their specialty match, the matches they're known for, but they always lose them. Like, Kane always gets lit on fire in Inferno matches. He's won like one of them.
Well, that's what it is, man. It's the simplicity of installing this knowledge within the fan simply through the history of their matches, and you begin to synonymize hardcore moments with Mick, or Fire with Kane, sure, or, you know, Hell in a Cell with Undertaker. It's because as a fan, you're rewarded for being loyal. You start to understand, oh, well, this environment that Mick is walking into with Randy, for example, is his realm. There's no way Randy can beat him in his realm in the, you know, sports presentation part of your brain. But that's what makes the heat matter, is that it's what makes the moment matter, is that knowledge you get from what they've already done in their career. And I love Mick Foley for being one of the most unselfish creators of moments for others in wrestling history. I don't think many people have done it better in creating stars over the years than Mick, except for arguably Triple H in the long run from a more behind the scenes part, because everybody historically knows how Triple H buries and buries and buries. But
I was going to say, I mean, if you talk about like everything being equal after the fact, if the bearing might outweigh the star making, but you're not wrong. Like Mick,
I think Trips learned over time the importance of making a star through how well he buried them.
yeah, well, it's like I mean, Triple H was made a star by Mick Foley, like straight up.
Absolutely,
like, he's one of the biggest, and it goes to show you that I was a fan because a friend of mine gassed me up to him because he was a fan, even though he didn't have to win. Like that's the goal, right? Like that's the goal is you have this guy who doesn't need to win, and yet, we complain about the same person we were talking about just a minute ago, Bray Wyatt, where it's like if you lose all the time, then people aren't really interested, and it's like, I think a big part of that is that reality TV era, that attitude era, if you will. A lot of the stuff that made guys a star happened outside of matches. They happened outside the ring,
or it happened beyond the matches. It was the method. It was the pathos that's created through the competition, through the pseudo competition, right? It's the emotions and the memories you take away. It's those moments that really became the foundation on which others could be launched. I will always applaud slight full circle super quick with JBL. I will always applaud how, yes, everybody helped him look like a slithering, terrible ass hole of a coward, right? Undertaker lost to him. Big Show lost to him. Booker lost to him. Batista lost to him. And then all four of them lost to him in the same match or something ridiculous, right? Like he had such a stupid run. And then that loss that he took at WrestleMania 23 to drop his title created Cena. And then Cena was the biggest star for 12, 13 years, and it's that stuff, man. It's the history and the hate and the character development through the results of these contests that create the foundation to launch the future stars. And it's wonderful to watch some of those moments when they work. It's also heartbreaking when they don't. Like that Evolution match, I don't think needed to happen. That loss didn't need to happen. Rock and Sock could have had their moment. But anyway, I love those star creating, analyzing those star creating aspects of wrestling.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of getting your heat after the fact. It probably doesn't resonate the same with most people, but like if Mick Foley, if the Rock and Sock Connection wins that match, and then afterwards they get beat up, like copacetic, I'm happy as a mark because the thumbtacks that Mick Foley is used to, but Randy Orton has never experienced matter, and they do their job and they work in a way that makes sense in my brain. But then what also makes sense is that Evolution's not okay with just losing.
Well, sure. Yeah.
What also makes sense is this guy who's literally spit in Mick Foley's face and shoved him down a flight of stairs isn't gonna just stop there.
Well, and it's funny because the parallels can be drawn to another fun star-making night, which did go the way I think you and I might prefer, where Shawn Michaels and Chris Jericho are battling at WrestleMania 19, and everybody knows that Jericho emulates Shawn. Shawn gets the win, cementing his ongoing legacy as a legend and a relatively recently returned main event player. But Jericho gets his heat after in the most Jericho way, and it all makes sense.
It's so good, right?
It's so good. You're absolutely
example.
Right.
It's a perfect example because in my head it makes sense that Shawn's a better wrestler, right? It makes sense that Shawn is Mr. WrestleMania. He's going to win the match, but the guy who walks away from it. But they did also tell that story literally with Triple H, Shawn Michaels, unsanctioned fight. Was it SummerSlam? The whole story of the match was like, yeah, you won, but who walked away? So
that
maybe
moment
too.
burned into my brain when Sean's in his wheelchair at WWF Confidential headquarters, and he decides he's just going to stand up and challenge Trips for that match.
Yeah.
I mean, like, God, Sean was so full of those burning moments in my head. And another reason why I think pound for pound, Sean is the greatest wrestler of all time to this point. I haven't seen anybody who's made me pick them otherwise.
It's tough
as
because
a performer, it's so hard.
I was feeling
so hard to pick favorites.
I was feeling that way, and then Jericho was starting to edge him out a bit, especially when Sean came out of retirement, and it was like, damn, bro, really? No, please don't. Okay, we're here now. But then also Jericho has been basically doing the exact same thing for like a full year now in AEW, where it's like, maybe wrestling isn't the thing he should be doing.
I'm a little bummed because, I think Jericho did, at least at the turn when AEW got its momentum to begin in 2019. I decided to tell you Jericho is the greatest of all time. He is.
Yeah,
we
both agreed on that at one point for sure.
I mean, statistically and
multiple companies all over the world.
I mean, and great characters, constantly reinventing himself. Fantastic consistency to in-ring work, the ability to reinvent his in-ring style, new finisher after new finisher. Like, Jericho was great. I think what's having him take a step back that challenges is he the greatest of all time truly for me now is let's put Shawn Michaels doing what Jericho's doing right now, right? Shawn never watered himself down. He knew he was one of the greatest, and he would lose when he needed to, at least in his latter run, certainly not in his initial run. But he was never letting himself be put into situations where he's an afterthought. And now I think Jericho is Jerry Lynning himself or watering himself down by simply seeing how many different things he can create to layer on top of his catalog of iconic catchphrases or wrestling holds or finishing maneuvers, right? He's doing too much. You don't have to work so hard. You're one of the greatest of all time. You should not allow yourself to be depicted or produced in a way that's anything else than that. I think Sean would pull off what Jericho's doing now better than how Jericho's pulling it off personally.
So I have a personal stance where a lot of stuff is down to booking. You could book, like it's one of those things where just a good example is like a lot of people could have been Goldberg. Not everybody.
Right.
You can't
just about to say that.
You can't book everybody to be like Goldberg. However, I've said this about multiple people where if you book them like Stone Cold, they would be as big of a star as Stone Cold, which is not a knock on Stone Cold. I think it's just a reality of the business. And Jericho was never booked as good as Shawn Michaels, and you can say that that's for a reason. However, if you give him those opportunities, if you book him in these ways, I think that there's a case to be made. And a big part of it for Shawn was injuries. A big part of it for Shawn was the people he bumped elbows with in the eras that he came up with, that WWF, the new school, the new era, and I think the biggest thing, so when you talk about like letting himself be booked in these places, he should have pretty much that power in AEW, but I don't know if he always has. And so I always appreciated that, what he was doing without those spots. I always thought that he was the best, that when he became the best, which was fairly recent, right? Like Shawn was the best, in my opinion, up until maybe like 2018, 19, 17, 18. But what it boils down to me is just Jericho has drank so much of his own Kool-Aid. He has heard these things about him and just pushed it to 11. It's, oh, well, I'm the guy who reinvents myself. Well, I'll reinvent myself to 11, and
right.
Oh, I'm the guy with catchphrases. I'll catchphrase myself to 11. I'll do the goofy outfits and I'll start my own I'll have my own faction to prove that factions are still good, and I'll make stars, and I'll bring in young guys so people don't think I'm an old guy taking spots. And it's like,
I think you're Go ahead.
He's trying to do everything, and you're diluting yourself by trying to do every single thing.
Right.
And I think sadly he's just overstayed his welcome. And then on top of that, in the same way that like the last of the sports era guys, the last of like the WCW old guard, you know, kind of did, he's just buying too much into his own character, where even when he's, you know, even like it's morphing together, you know, like listening to him on his podcast is just kind of weird now. It's just, I don't really listen to Talk Is Jericho anymore, and like all of his opinions outside of wrestling are just like, I can't separate it. I can't not see Chris Jericho the guy now, because he's just always himself. He's always on, and he's just overstayed his welcome after becoming the best, you know, after convincing me that he has the greatest career of all time. It went like 3 more years, and I went, come on, just fucking stop, dude. Just put, put the microphone down, fucking stop tweeting, just go away for some time.
I feel like you've done an excellent job slowly tying together a point I was going to make, in that Shawn Michaels was marketed and performed like, and was seen as, and created the character of the greatest in-ring performer of all time. That was his character. And he forever remained committed to that character. Jericho may very well now be one of the most important wrestling figures of all time, but I think it's purely from an entertainment standpoint. He is maybe the finest sports entertainer of all time. Henceforth,
unironically.
Exactly. Henceforth, what he's done with, you know, trying to make that his latest, you know, wrinkle in his reinvention sequence.
It was really important for Shawn to become the greatest showman, the greatest performer, because he was the polar opposite. He was directly across the ring from, most of the time at least, one of the greatest characters in The Undertaker, and also the greatest wrestler, the greatest technical wrestler in Bret Hart. So now some of our viewers might know that, or might not know, but you know how I feel about Bret Hart, and so I've always been on the Shawn Michaels camp. But but when it comes to marketability, and it comes to booking, and it comes to like all the real factors, right? Like taking aside my opinions and things like that, like when it comes to, you need to make a niche, you need to make a place for yourself in the industry. Well, you're not going to be a bigger character than The Undertaker. You know, you're not going to be a more imposing character than The Undertaker or Diesel or, you know, even King Mabel at the time, like, you know, Vader, where like these guys are like these unique looks, right? Like the body guys, you know, where their character is their body type, but you're not going to do that as Shawn Michaels, and you're just not going to be a more technical wrestler than Bret Hart, and you're never going to convince anybody that you're a better technical wrestler than Bret Hart. So what's left to do? It's to be the performer.
So that's right. That's what we're stumbling upon, is now we've seen so many different bests of their different approaches to this art form, right? Undertaker, best character. Fight me on that. Shawn Michaels, best in-ring performer. Fight me on that. Ric Flair, best bad guy. Fight me on that.
Oh, I'll fight you on that one.
I'm sure. But
do you know the term working heel?
Well, I do. I think we have that be episode 7. Yeah. Chris Jericho, greatest entertainer. Bret Hart, greatest technician. Everybody's got that niche thing that...
Notice, real quick, before you move on, real quick, and all the stuff you mentioned, notice you have a best bad guy, but no one ever mentions a best good guy.
Ooh, the greatest baby face of all time.
Yeah, no one's ever like, wow, he's so good at being a face.
Well, Hogan probably wins that for one generation. Cena probably wins that for another generation.
No. You would not think of them that way, though, unless someone posed that question.
I would think of Cena as the best good guy ever. Personally.
Only if you pose the question that specific way. No one's ever. If you think of Cena or Hogan, you don't say they're the best baby. You say they're the best top guy. You say they're at the top. No one. People almost never put a heel as a top guy.
You could say Hogan's the best top guy. You could put Cena the best baby face. Personally,
I'm just saying. You went through that whole list and you came up with a best bad guy, but you never thought of a best good guy.
I could have kept going. I didn't. I mean,
no. I'm just saying. When it comes to being a babyface, there's a reason why it's like it's like a neutral standpoint to be at the top, whereas to pick out a good bad guy, you have to go out of your way and create that niche. That's important to the conversation.
Randy could be regarded as one of the best bad guys. Jake the Snake Roberts, another probably all-time guy on that list of best bad guys.
I just think it's a weird category. You could argue
JBL. JBL got it. He understands what it means to be a fucking asshole bad guy, right?
I just think it's a weird category. That's all. People point that out a lot. They point out like best heel, best working heel. They come up with qualifications for it, but like when it comes to being the best babyface, it's never about how good you are as a babyface. It's always just like, are you marketable? Are you a ticket seller? You know, it's not about your character. So I will always argue that that every single performer out there who makes it into the Hall of Fame status has done it in their own unique brushstroke, their own unique way. All of them have their own little itty bitty something significant, and in some ways it's louder than others, like the ones I rifled off a few minutes ago. And now we're getting to an era where the ability to create that niche is getting harder and harder, to the point where a Bray Wyatt will be compared to guys like Mick and Undertaker. Arguably, whatever, you don't have to agree with me. Or a guy like Kevin Owens. Kevin Owens can be regarded as an attempt to recreate the Austin vibe of anarchy. Oh,
right?
Jesus.
Moxley too. Same idea. That's the problem. That's where wrestling is struggling today, is the new niches. The new way to define yourself as one of a kind.
It's not for us. It's for a new generation.
That's right. And that's where a Darby Allin is going to be what Jeff Hardy was to you, right? Or for me, like where, I don't even know. I'd have to play a video game and determine who's got the latest Bradshaw hammer. You know what I mean? In order for me to find my weird pet favorite, right?
You're not big on the cowboy lasso. What is it?
I never liked Bradshaw for the cowboy Texan part of him.
No,
I liked
what's the Hangman Adam Page lariat?
Oh yeah,
he's basically just does the
buckshot lariat.
Yeah, he does the clothesline from hell, but it's flippy dippy indie shit.
There's nothing. I'll be honest. Now that you've brought him up, I mean, there's nothing about Hangman Page to me that says I'm different. Zero.
Not even the fact that he's a literal horse.
But he's not a literal horse.
I don't know. That's just my favorite Hangman Adam Page joke.
Jesus.
You're just like, here he comes, actual horse, because it's just his Titantron is a fucking horse.
All I can say, man, is
why doesn't he do cowboy shit? Why is his I could just talk shit about Hangman Adam.
Apparently cowboy shit means drinking and wearing tassels.
It means being an alcoholic and wearing your wife's shirt. Yeah, chaps.
Oh man.
It actually just apparently means hanging out at a gay bar every weekend. Because that's the people I know who who are alcoholics and wear chaps every week. They hang out at
What about me? What about Canyon? Don't make homosexuality a cowboy trait, buddy.
I mean, who better than Canyon?
Who better than Canyon? May you rest in peace.
All right, let's move off the Hangman topic, because that guy's not even on TV anymore, is he?
I mean, he's having ongoing feuds with Moxley, who
is he? Okay.
You know, and Moxley, to his credit, I love what Moxley does in the ring and what he provides as a character and a persona, but I don't buy him as the toughest man in most matches. Oddly enough,
Interesting.
I mean, tough, yes, but the guy who's going to win, I don't buy him as the winner in many matchups personally.
I love everything he does until he actually gets in the ring with somebody. Like, it's so wild. I am so hype on the entrance, the coming through the crowd, even during the COVID era where there like wasn't one. Like, just it's like he's just showing up in the stadium from an Uber. You know, like he didn't even go through the locker room and shower. He's just like showing up to do his job. Like in that almost like you gave me these parameters and I'm gonna do the bare minimum. You know what I mean? Like you told me be here at this time for this match. That's when I'm gonna show up. Like I love the theme song. I like the old theme and the Wild Thing theme. You know, like so much of what he does before the match is great. And then he gets in there and tries to actually wrestle people. And I'm like, no. You don't get to wrestle a character like Jon Moxley. He beats the fuck out of you. Why are they wrestling? Yeah. Why is there a competitive, scrappy match where he has to put on a fucking bulldog? No, this guy should just beat the shit out of people.
It is so funny that you say that because for the longest time I thought that he was becoming the most successful attempt at recreating the Austin aura.
Yeah,
but Austin didn't chain fucking wrestle. Austin got in there and threw right hands until you couldn't get up. You know, and he was a rough neck wrestler, and Moxley is generally as well. He just chain wrestles more than he should. You're totally right.
Well, which is why I don't even know if I'd call what he's doing chain wrestling. Like that's the problem is it's so in between it. So it's like he's always clashing styles with other people.
I will say that I think he challenges himself to take some of their notes. You know what I mean? And tries to. He's like a wrestling empath. He wants to do a little bit of his opponent each time.
It's because in AEW, every single match is like this spectacle, one-off, super card. Can you believe it? These two guys are wrestling. It's Jungle Boy versus Jon Moxley. Did you ever think you'd see it? Oh my God. Like, everybody's so over. It's always a dream card, even though have no stakes, and you know Jon Moxley's going to retain the title, and
that is what has been disappointing about AEW. At first, it was like a shots fired across the bow. Here come these upstart kids
because they were actual dream cards in the beginning. Like, it actually was like, holy shit, Jon Moxley debuted here at the first show, and it was like, holy shit, Jericho and Omega in America. It was like, holy shit, these things are actually happening, and they built them up, and now it's like. They want me to care as much about that shit as, you know, fucking Colt Cabana versus, I don't know, pick anybody. Like, like they're like, oh my God, it's Luchasaurus versus Rey Fenix. Look at how crazy and different their fucking body types are. And you know, did you ever think you'd see these guys? And it's like, I've seen them wrestle like 5 times now, and there's never a reason for them to wrestle. They just do. And they just do the same shit every time. And there's no stakes. There's no reason why it's a big deal. There's nothing, you know, like, again, going back to that Undertaker Judgment Day thing. Undertaker had a bone to pick with the McMahon-Helmsley regime, and he came to even the score, and then he fucked up. It was the hero's folly. It's a Greek tragedy, if you want to get theater nerd about it.
Interesting.
And like, you're not getting that kind of stuff from current wrestling, whether it's AEW or WWE, and you're probably finding this stuff most in NXT if it's actually happening. But to see it in NXT, I have to sit through a girl in her pajamas hitting people with a pillow. So,
and the problem with NXT has been, for me personally, that they cleaned house too thoroughly. You know, Vince dumped all of the pet projects that were remaining in Triple H's catalog from the NXT and turned it into NXT 2.0. And that's when I stopped watching.
How many iterations?
I used to love NXT so much.
Yeah, how many iterations of NXT has there actually been now?
It's hard to say.
It's like
it began in 2012 untelevised, right? 2012 around untelevised.
Was it that late? I thought it was earlier than that.
and that's when they started doing the WWE Network, and that's when I discovered it. And
so you're discounting the NXT that came before,
right?
Yeah,
and it's fun. It's fun. I think you and I could probably benefit from reliving that era right before they got onto the network, and it was Neville, Bo Dallas, and help me, oh my God, Sami Zayn really driving that era in NXT specifically. Like right before then, when Seth Rollins was, the up and comer, and you were seeing Roman Reigns in that role too, and William Regal was still wrestling, putting over guys like Claudio and Dean Ambrose, of course, John Moxley.
Yeah.
I mean, that era would be fun to watch because I did miss that. I did miss that brief era of NXT for sure.
I'm glad you just mentioned all those guys, because I did want to touch on it a little bit, right, to bring it back to the point, if you will, where with John Moxley, I was so hyped for the Blackpool Combat Club to add that wrinkle and change the way he does things. I don't think it really changed his in-ring performance that much, which was a little sad, because we talked about how he's got that brawling, and he feels like he owes it to fans to chain wrestle and like put on a good match. He feels like he owes it to them to put on an actual, wrestling match back and forth, not just crush guys, kill them, no squashes, whatever. And I get that, and
he's very good
and not necessarily just do garbage wrestling, not just do hardcore shit.
He gives a lot to his opponents, and I don't dislike Moxley. I feel like there's just this weird wrinkle of wasted potential for me.
You have to give him stuff to prove you're tough, to be fair.
Mm-hmm.
To prove you're tough, you got to get beat up, right? Like,
yeah. Oh yeah. I'm not knocking that. I just wanted more out of his character work. I always feel like he's such an amazingly unique character in the way his little mannerisms are. And I remember early promos as Ambrose being extremely cerebral along the same lines as a Bray or a Mick Foley, so much in his head about how he could meander his way through a promo and twist you into believing, he has no regard for what he's about to do. And I feel like that's where his potential has been wasted is then he goes in there and then he has too many competitive matches, right? He gives too much.
So that's why I was hoping the Blackpool Combat Club would add a wrinkle to his in-ring performance where, like, you would not... The same way I described him earlier, right? Where he's everything before the match, the build-up, the coming through the crowd, he's this badass, he's this tough guy, he's got no regard for his own life type of shit like that. Mm-hmm. It's the kind of thing where, while being legit tough guys, Brian Daniel, I don't know. They're literally interchangeable, yeah. The American Dragon and Claudio, they have their own tough guy thing, but they're also insanely technical wrestlers, right? They're
Claudio Castagnoli is the epitome of wasted potential. If they just put a mouthpiece with him, regardless of the promotion, and committed to it.
That was supposed to be William Regal, right? That's why, like, Blackpool Combat Club was supposed to fix all of these guys' short. It was supposed to bring it all together, and it's kind of sad that it was short, and it's kind of sad that it just kind of devolved into, like, we're going to have fucking trios matches where we all just kind of continue to do our same stuff. Mm-hmm. And they added that stupid elbow spot where they all do the worst looking fucking elbow smashes. That's like the only thing it added. It added the worst fucking thing about all of their offenses, which was really disappointing because, I feel like you can milk the Moxley matches, and you can add, more than just the squash to it by giving him that, if you will, Pete Dunne style sadism. You give him that technical aspect where it's not necessarily like beautiful wrestling, but it's technically very painful.
Dude, but good job bringing up a guy who has... I love Pete Dunne with everything that I am. He's my current fave. He's
been sitting through some real bad gimmicks, huh? He's been persevering.
He's so freaking good. And I know Triple H noticed that back in the CWC. And I am so glad that even with the Butch name, he's been able to make it his own. I love what Pete does. He is in a world of so many similar wrestlers, he still stands out, and it's great to know it's not because of his size. It's
Yeah.
just the way he presents himself. It's his in-ring choices. It's his unique joint manipulation style. I mean, kudos to him. He's got it
Where's that
figured out.
match? I need the Pete Dunne versus Moxley match. We got to find that. They had to have wrestled at some point.
Boy, that would be a
that's
fantastic match if they did it in the right.
Yeah, that's the homework for tonight after this podcast, or someone down in the comments on YouTube. Link me that match because I'm going to go find it one way or another. There's no way it hasn't happened. If it hasn't happened, Jesus Christ, I need it. Because again, like, for me, when it comes to the Mox character, it's pretty down to earth for all things considered. It's, very straightforward in like a carnal, satisfying sort of way. We're here to watch simulated violence, and like that. This is a guy who's not going to beat around the bush and give it to me. And unfortunately, I don't want to see sloppy, shitty punches and the terrible elbows and the fake stomps and all that shit. When Mox is at his best, it's when he's hurtling through the air at people. It's when he's delivering those shots to guys in the corner. It's, like the Austin stomp in a mud hole is some of the worst looking shit in the world, but God, it gets the crowd hyped because it's so intense, right? It's the whole ring shaking. Yeah. It's the ropes are going.
He's already dead.
Yeah, it's the people selling for him and stuff like that too. And and it's not elegant, it's not fancy, it's not flippy dippy. It's just a guy fucking doing jumping stomps while holding onto the rope and then pandering to the crowd afterwards. And like, I've always felt like Mox has this great opportunity to pander to the crowd in a not so obvious way, because he can like relish in the damage he's dealing. He can bring you to this moment and highlight the violence that he, that his character supposedly thrives on, without necessarily looking like he's taking a break from the match to pander to the crowd. And that's a massive pet peeve for me in current wrestling is do one move, pander to crowd, do second move, pander to crowd, do third move, pander to crowd. And it's like, bro, it's been 3.5 minutes and you've done like 3 suplexes,
Yeah, well, then you're not a fan of Baron Corbin. We got it.
Shit. I'm not a fan of classic wrestling at that point. That's
true.
Baron,
that's absolutely true. Bubba Ray Dudley, I mean, he was the first guy who really explored how to get under the fan's skin in between
he's
literally
so
every move. Oh yeah, man.
He's
of
so
course.
good at
Kingston too. Not to take away from Eddie Kingston, I said a while ago, I think he's one of the best promos I've ever seen, Eddie Kingston. And I don't give a crap about his in-ring work. Not in a bad way. I just mean like I respect him for the conviction that he brings to his presentation. And I get this weird sense that some corner of him absolutely agrees everything he says on the stick. And I love talkers. In case you can't tell, I love a good talker. I mean, Pete Dunne is silent but deadly. But if he started talking as good as like a Kingston or an MJF or a Jericho or etc., I mean,
what was it?
A different way of excelling, I guess.
Was it Matt Riddle that he did it the first time with? But when he had that tag team where he would just shrug, like whatever was happening, he would just shrug, and then they would just start beating someone's ass. Like,
brilliant.
That shit was the best, actually. Like, Pete Dunne.
The only reason why that didn't become Pete's path to the main roster was because Riddle had his, wellness policy issues, and or Pete got injured. It was one or the other. It was some outside circumstance, but that tag team was so good. And it was the reason why WWE knew they could pull off RK Bro,
which is so sad. It's actually so sad.
It should have been Pete. Yeah, it should have been
RK Bro
for Pete.
I did not like RK Bro, and I'll be honest, the Matt Riddle and they had a name, but I can't remember it now. But the Matt Riddle and Broserweights, it might have been Broserweights, but
that was it.
Yeah, Dunn and Riddle, I wasn't the biggest fan of, just because I felt like the clash was a little too much, and like Riddle's character with RK Bro is just so fucking off the deep end for the comedy and
my God,
like it just doesn't resonate with me. But
I liked it only because it was the first time it appeared like the man Randy Orton was having fun in the ring in like 10 years. He looked like he was sleepwalking through a good central portion of his career.
That's so weird to me, because I felt like Randy was always having fun because it looked so easy to him. Like the first WWE event I ever went to in person, Randy Orton poked his head outside of the fucking venue, and we're all in line wrapped around the building. I'm like 100th in line, and he happens to pop his head out like 10 feet from me, and he goes, "Hey, what are you guys all standing in line for?" And has like a huge laugh to himself before closing the door, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, it's Randy Orton," you know, and they're all losing their minds just because they saw a guy they're about to watch later on in a show, you know, like he's in the show, guys. And for a bunch of people, it was like this cool special moment and stuff. And like, so every time I see Randy Orton, it seems like he's just cruising, which is true, but I feel like he's enjoying the cruise. But you know, a lot of people really respect him because he makes it look so easy, because he looks so casual doing it. And for me, that's always taken me out of it. That's always taken me away from it. I feel like once he became a main eventer, that was it. His career peaked. It's over. He didn't go anywhere from there.
I would love to dissect exactly how true that statement could be, because I don't think he changed a whole lot in ring, except how much how
often he injures himself slapping the canvas.
I was gonna say he did more incorporating the nuances of his natural grace in the ring. Like, he went from being the legend killer who made it look easy to the Viper who made it look easy slowly and methodically and intentionally. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And everyone loses their mind because he stomps on certain body parts. But then he doesn't work those body parts. Like, like, it's cool that he like methodically puts your hand there and then stomps on it, and then he stomps on your elbow, and then he stomps on your other elbow, and then 4 minutes later he's stomping on your fucking ankle, and we're done. Like, it just I don't know. It's cool that he's got like these animations you can put in a video game and recognize regardless of who's doing it. But I don't think that makes you like a great psychological wrestler.
It would be really interesting to have seen a Randy Orton versus Jake the Snake Roberts, both in their prime. I think it would be really fun, a masterclass in the subtlety of performance art in wrestling. Honestly,
I feel like that would be it would be a waste of Jake the Snake's fucking talent. Randy's the opposite. Jake would tailor his psychology to who he's fighting and would make it personal. Randy is a blank.
You should pop on your point because it's lame.
I'm actually choking on how fucking bland Randy's wrestling is, and like you're adding like delicious spices to like saltine crackers. Randy Orton is cookie cutter. He is 5 moves of doom, but the heel version. He is literally just Dark Cena.
Well, I mean, you can't necessarily be wrong there. I mean,
he's literally just
juxtaposed each other. He was the anti-Cena for sure. I get that.
He is actually just 5 moves of doom, except he doesn't do them congruently because he's a heel. So he has to do them at different points in the match so that Cena can have hope spots and then do all 5 of his together.
Look at the adjective, congruently. Got it. I'm sure you meant consecutively, but you're right.
Do you not know what congruently
Power
means?
slam, backbreaker,
Wait.
Drink DDT.
Did you actually just do the look at the adjective thing, like, unironically?
That was the goal.
That was the goal.
You said congruently.
All right, we gotta move on.
What
This
is
isn't
this? Geometry?
I was about.
Come on, dude.
All right. Okay. Well, you saved it by going deeper, I guess.
I had to because you didn't get it.
Yeah,
Moving
sure.
forward.
I'm not the one who got it.
Hey, you can see how we can tangent into a million different episodes of this thing.
So I just have to ask because I'm the lore guy. For the Kevin Nash quote, what was the adjective that Kevin Nash said?
Look at the adjective play.
Okay, so you at least do know
I
the
literally,
reference.
when you listen to that clip very closely, there's a guy in the third row who clearly goes, "That's a verb."
Yeah, that's true. That's my favorite part of that clip.
I will forever go back and love that. And I'm terrified of Kevin Nash as a human being. So the one chance I had to meet him was at some convention here in town. I didn't even know he was going to be there. And he was sitting behind the desk. And I literally talked to the people around me like, I'm going to go up there and tell him if he wants to make like an adjective and play. And I just didn't have the balls because I'm pretty sure he would have put me through the table he was sitting behind. He probably would have
just
torn a
called you an
hamstring
idiot.
doing it, but still.
He would have just called you an idiot and he would have hurt your feelings because you care what
That's
other people think.
Oh man, don't do that to me. Way to break my baby face up. That's funny. Yeah, you're right. I care too much about what people think. And hopefully you guys will have some feedback for us after this lengthy conversation introducing you all to how we really overthink this amazing art form. For me, I call it art because it is theater, it is athleticism, it is storytelling, it is so amazing how much value they can cram into such small a moment with wrestling. And I will never be able to get away from it. I have tried to walk away, but I just have too much respect for what it is. And I always wished I could do something for the business someday, but oh well. I'm 34 and frumpy, so probably not.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good way to bring it back here because we've been at this for over 2 hours now. And at the risk of at
burning all of our future content.
Yeah, at the risk of just absolutely wearing people out, this is probably a good time to wrap things up just a little bit here and talk about how going forward with the future, right? I mentioned at the very beginning that this was, at least for me personally, this is my journey to get back into wrestling, to find that love for it, because I think I was burnt out trying to watch all of it. And much like many hobbies in today's world, you have to find the things that you enjoy and engage with that. I'm no longer going to feel bad about only watching certain matches from NJPW, you know?
Okay.
I used to feel really bad because I would go to like find their big pay-per-views, or like their schedules is so different than American wrestling, where it's like I'm only tuning in for the big matches and I'm skipping the young lions, and I'm looking for names I know, and unfortunately they're all Westerners, they're all white guys pretty much, stuff like that, where not exclusively all the time, because I'm a big Tanahashi fan, but it's going to be the kind of thing where I don't want to feel bad about doing that stuff anymore. I do just want to find the things that I enjoy and engage and follow those. I really wish that there was a way to almost search by storyline. You basically, if you want to do it through like the WWE Network, which sucks really bad, it's a terrible fucking app.
Well, rest in peace. Now it's Peacock, and that's bad enough. Yeah.
Same thing. It's worse. It somehow got worse. They made a shitty app even fucking worse somehow. But the point is you'd have to search like by a specific wrestler, and just like watch their shit. And so, like, that's what I want. I want to identify the stuff that I enjoy, and I want to follow that stuff. And with that being said, going forward, you know, this is going to be my way to identify the stuff that I like and maybe the things I don't like, and maybe, like you said, get feedback from people in the comments that can steer me more towards things that I will enjoy, more stuff that, you know, is worth watching, because frankly, there's like what, 15 hours of fucking wrestling like between NXT,
Every
Raw,
week.
SmackDown, Dynamite, Rampage,
Dark.
and yeah, Dark, anything that comes from Japan
Main
at
event.
all. There's actually so much wrestling I just put on in the background from Japan right now, because I'm just trying to find, like, I'm trying to cast the widest net and make sure I don't miss stuff. And Stardom is always doing something interesting, even if I don't really understand what's going on. Like, you know, and that goes back to like the storyline issue where it's like I can tune in and go, wow, this is visually interesting and I want to get hooked, but like for Japanese wrestling I need subtitles or whatever, you know what I mean? And
right.
So there's so many things that made me feel like a fake fan. I'm over it. It's 2023, it's a new year, it's new me. I'm just gonna like the stuff I like, and hopefully I won't talk as much shit about all the stuff that I don't like, but there is a lot of it.
Well, and the thing is there's going to be, as many wise wrestling critics have said, when wrestling's bad, it's truly awful. That's what makes it very comparable to a soap opera. But when it's,
I just want to say really quick. I just want to say really quick, that used to be the fun of it. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that used to be the fun of it, and it's not anymore. You're not allowed to do that anymore.
What do you mean? To be?
I mean, the fun of it used to be
that bad.
No, the fun of it used to be that we would talk shit about the bad parts. It used to be that you and your friends could pretty much agree on the shitty parts and talk shit about it.
Look at Jericho Appreciation Society.
Okay, but look at Orange Cassidy.
Crappy.
Look at The Rock's entire fucking career.
Whoa!
Look at how we trashed Hangman Adam Page. You could name... If you named 5 wrestlers you wanted to watch, I would assume 3 out of 5 of them I don't. Like, that's what, you know, and people are like, well, how can you say that? Every wrestler's over. Everybody is good. They all put their bodies on the... And it's like, I'm sorry. They're not
I still don't
all...
want to see Sammy Guevara fight.
Yeah, right? Like, well, and see, this is big. This is character growth from the Warren that I used to try to launch a podcast with. Because back in 2016, it was, you know, pretty much just WWE focused. And I can remember back then you used to have to roll your eyes and go, all right, well, I'm not going to get into it with you because the podcast would completely devolve. And at the time it was about like Bray Wyatt, you know, like I've never been a Bray Wyatt fan. Everyone loves this fucking guy. And I'm like, why? Now? What has he done?
It's just captivating performances, man.
It's just something different. It's just something different to look at, and that's
the beauty. That's the beauty of the industry, and the beauty of getting to talk about it is that everybody's presentation would be uniquely different, and every fan takes in that presentation differently.
Yeah.
So it's a beautiful thing because you can get conversations that we'll agree to disagree a lot. But I have come a long way, bud, and I think our listeners will notice that. I do have things that I check out to, and I don't enjoy anymore about pro wrestling. And you got to be great to stand out at this point. And there's a lot of talent swimming around out there, and they're constantly exposing more. So buckle up. You know, we're gonna have plenty of different ways to approach this topic, and I'm sure you can bring it home from here.
Well, I love that you acknowledge that it is actually growth to stop liking certain wrestlers, and maybe in the future that means we'll agree more. But there's obviously going to be some risks between us. But if you want to find out about that, you'll have to hit that subscribe button and check into future episodes as we discuss the landscape of wrestling. We're going to talk about the past of wrestling and, you know, just try to cover whatever we feel like talking about, because frankly, it's the internet and there are no rules. We can do whatever we want.
I'm looking forward to the journey, my man. It's been a pleasure in having this conversation and opening up some of the parts of us that that have stood out over the years in this industry and our fandom for it. So it'll be fun to see if we can get back to that core place where we're just able to enjoy it for what it is again, or if somehow, some way, this business will repel me or you and make us find new passions in life. But I highly doubt it. So thanks for all this.
Yeah, man, this has been an absolute blast. I do want to leave our fans and you with a quick little trivia question, because wrestling trivia is one of my favorite things. And one of my favorite things is because it's almost never true. Almost any time that there's like a trivia question, there's someone who's got to pop up and go, actually, in 1984 in Mexico, there was a ladder match between the cockatrice and, so I love to see stuff like that. I love to learn through that. So I'm going to ask you a multiple choice. I'm going to make it easy for the first one. I don't think I'll do multiple choices in the future, but
okay.
Only because I found that this answer was incredibly interesting to me. This is something I learned recently, and unfortunately, to format it correctly, I would have to make it multiple choice. But which of these three wrestlers debuted as a fan? Is it A, AJ Lee, B, Beth Phoenix, or C, Molly Holly? For those of you listening on YouTube, you can answer in the comments below. You can pause this video, take as much time as you need to think about it, and see if you get it right. Comment below what your answer is which of these wrestlers debuted as a fan? A, AJ Lee, B, Beth Phoenix, or C, Molly Holly?
Man. Wait for it. Think on it.
If we had actual production value, this is be where the knockoff Jeopardy theme plays.
Is your wrestling knowledge pinned to the mat? 1, 2, 3. We'll find out if mine is. As I say, my gut wants me to guess AJ Lee.
Is that your final answer?
I am going to lock it in.
That is incorrect, my friend. It was actually Beth Phoenix.
WWE Hall of Famer. Wow.
Yep. She debuted.
I'll have to find that.
Yeah, she debuted jumping over the guardrail to, I believe, attack Mickie James, if I'm not mistaken. And there was like this whole storyline of she's like from her past and she hates her and blah, blah, blah. I might be getting it mixed up with, I think, the Eva Marie. They did this thing like they did it like twice in a row, pretty back and forth. It might be confused, which is why I had to make it multiple choice. Because as you know, there's plenty of people who debuted as fans, like Santino Marella and things like that. But they took her off TV like right after she debuted as like a crazy fan who jumped a guardrail and got banned from shows or whatever. Like it was like the storyline. They took her off TV, took her back to developmental, and then re-debuted her as the Glamazon, and she fucking shot to the moon and became champ. And everyone forgets that she was some crazy stalker. Like she was like a stalker of a stalker. That's how deep it went.
I remember, and because I love being humbled on my wrestling knowledge, I've pulled up the video of Beth's debut, and that was piggybacking off of Mickie James's I Love Trish Stratus storyline.
Yeah, it was super weird. It's like she was like, you wronged me in the past and I'll get you, bitch. And like, It was just like, okay, so you're stalking a girl who just did a stalker gimmick.
It's good that they gave Beth a more distinctive arrival to WWE later on, for sure. So, Hey, you stumped me. It's okay. I don't know everything as much as I love the business. It'll be fun to see where in the future I prove you right or wrong as far as how ironclad my love for the business is.
I look forward to it, my friend, and I look forward to seeing all the answers, correct or incorrect, in the comments below. But that's going to do it for us. I am Sam Tate, the ace that runs the place. I was joined tonight by my best friend, Raw is Warren, and we will see you guys next time on the Scheduled for One Fall podcast. Peace out, everyone.